We're optimizing our operational structure, Clayton. Brent Sterling Junior leaned back in his Herman Miller chair, a picture of detached corporate authority. He was 32 years old, with a Wharton MBA and the kind of unearned confidence that comes from inheriting a multi-million-dollar development company. Your role, as it's currently defined, is being made redundant. He said it like he was reading a weather report. Redundant. 26 years of my life, summarized by a word he'd learned in a seminar. My name is Clayton Rhodes. I'm 55 years old. Until that moment, at 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, I was the Senior Land Surveyor for Sterling Development, the company I'd helped build from 3 employees and a used pickup truck into a regional powerhouse. I looked past Brent, through the glass wall of his new minimalist office. I could see the bullpen where younger people in expensive casual clothes typed on their MacBook Pros. They were the optimizers, the synergizers. I was the old infrastructure, the guy who still used a plumb bob and trusted his own field notes more than any GPS algorithm. The man he was firing had personally walked and marked every square inch of the ground that paid for this glass office, for Brent's Brioni suit, for the $1,200 Montblanc pen he now picked up to gesture at my termination papers. He continued, the lie so smooth it was almost impressive. Minor issues. I'd told him 2 weeks prior that the preliminary survey for the new luxury condo development showed a potential 5-foot encroachment onto the neighboring Miller farm. 5 feet doesn't sound like much, but over the 800-foot property line, that was 4,000 square feet. It was the difference between a legal setback and a catastrophic lawsuit. His response had been a dismissive wave. Legal will handle the easements. Get the stakes in the ground, Clayton. We're breaking ground on the 15th. I didn't argue. I just looked at the papers on his polished concrete desk. A severance offer of 6 weeks' pay. An NDA as thick as a phone book. My knuckles were white where I gripped the arms of my chair. A dead calm settled over me. It's a feeling I learned in the Army. A strange, cold clarity that washes over you right before everything goes sideways. It's the moment you stop being a target and start being a threat. He pushed the documents toward me. Sign these and we can make this a smooth transition. I stood up. I didn't touch the papers. I didn't touch the pen. I'll need to have my lawyer review this. Brent sighed, a theatrical display of impatience. Fine. Have it back to HR by the end of the day. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal effects. He had no idea. He saw a 55-year-old man in worn-out work boots, a relic to be cleared away. He didn't see the institutional memory of his own company walking out the door. He didn't understand that the land has a memory too, and for 26 years, I had been its most meticulous historian. What Brent Sterling Jr. didn't know was that his signature on my termination letter was the second most important signature of the day. The most important ones would be my own, made with a 50-cent Bic pen on a stack of county forms, and they were about to dismantle his entire inheritance. If you like stories about quiet competence beating loud arrogance, about the details the big picture guys always miss, hit that like button and subscribe right now. I promise you stories every week about corporate karma and the kind of justice that is patient, methodical, and absolutely final. 2 days before the humiliation, I was standing in mud up to my ankles on the future site of the Evergreen Point condominiums. The air was cold, smelling of wet earth and diesel from the excavators idling nearby. I was checking a boundary marker, a simple iron pin my crew had set. My Trimble GPS unit was telling me one thing, but my gut, and a secondary check from a decades-old reference point on the other side of the highway, was telling me another. The numbers were off, just by a little, but a little, in my line of work, is the same as a mile. It's the difference between a building and a lawsuit. I went to see Brent that afternoon. I laid the preliminary plat on his desk and pointed to the discrepancy. I said. He barely looked up from his iPad. I replied. He snapped, finally looking at me with open annoyance. It was a dismissal. That was the breaking point. Not for him, but for me. It was the culmination of the 11 months since his father, Brent Sterling Senior, had died and left him the company. I started at Sterling Development in 1998. I was 29 years old, just out of the Army Corps of Engineers. Brent Sr. was 45, a tough, barrel-chested builder who ran his business out of a double-wide trailer on his first construction site. I was employee number 3. My first job was to survey the 20-acre parcel that would become the Oak Terrace subdivision, the project that put Sterling on the map. He paid me $38,000 a year and worked me 70 hours a week. I missed my daughter's first steps because I was staking a sewer line in the rain. I spent my 5th wedding anniversary triple-checking the elevation grades for a commercial park. That was the price of building something. Brent Sr. understood that. He'd been there, in the mud with us. He valued my caution. He called me his brake pedal. In 2005, he wanted to buy a huge tract of land for a golf course community. The seller had a recent survey showing 500 pristine acres. Brent was ready to sign. I spent 3 weeks walking that land, digging up old markers, pulling deeds from the county archive that went back to the 1920s. I found that a 40-acre parcel in the middle of the property was landlocked, with no legal access. A fact conveniently omitted from the seller's survey. That discovery saved Brent Sr. from a $4 million mistake. He gave me a $10,000 bonus and told the whole company, quote 16, Brent Jr. read spreadsheets. He saw land as a line item, a commodity. He'd never gotten his boots dirty. He'd spent his summers interning at hedge funds in New York, while I was teaching his father's crews how to read survey stakes. When he took over, his first act was to hire a consulting firm to quote 17. They produced a 100-page report full of charts and buzzwords. The conclusion was that the company's most valuable assets were its brand and its land holdings. And the path to growth was faster development cycles and aggressive leveraging of those assets. My methodical, time-consuming verification process was labeled a bottleneck. The secret weapon, the thing Brent Jr. could never have understood, was born out of his father's pragmatism. It started back in 2009, during the recession. Money was tight. Sterling Development was trying to acquire a distressed property for a new retail center, but the title was a mess. There was a clear boundary overlap with the adjacent lot, about a 10-foot strip. Fixing it legally would have taken months and cost money the company didn't have. I remember standing with Brent Sr. in the rain, looking at the plat on the hood of his F-150. "What do we do, Clay?" he asked. "The right way is to file a corrected survey and negotiate a boundary line agreement with the neighbor," I told him. He chewed on his unlit cigar. "And the fast way?" "The fast way is we use the flawed survey for the bank loan and hope the neighbor never notices. It's a risk." He looked at me, his eyes tired. "Here's what we're gonna do. You document the hell out of the real boundary line. Make your own private file. Notes, pictures, everything. Keep it at your house. Don't file it with the county. We'll build, and when we're back on our feet, we'll go buy that strip of land from the neighbor and clean it all up. This way," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "we have a record, a contingency file. It protects you if this ever goes sideways." It became our unofficial procedure for problematic parcels. Over the next decade, it happened another dozen times. A rushed closing, a disputed easement, a century-old deed with vague descriptions. Each time, the official survey filed with the county would be the one that made the project viable, the one that satisfied the banks and the planners. And each time, I would create a second, meticulously detailed, and perfectly accurate survey. I labeled it, documented the discrepancy in a sworn affidavit, and placed it in a fireproof filing cabinet in my basement. Brent Sr. and I called it the Truth File. It was his insurance policy and my professional protection. After he died, the Truth File became something else. It became a time bomb. Brent Jr. didn't know it existed. He'd inherited the assets, but not the institutional knowledge. He didn't know about the handshake deals, the quiet understandings, and the documented risks his father had taken to build the company. He saw only a clean portfolio of properties, ready to be exploited. My personal stakes were simple. My wife, Sarah, had passed away 3 years ago after a long illness. The medical bills had eaten through most of our savings. My Sterling pension was all I had left to get my daughter Emily through her final year of university and hopefully graduate school. Losing my job at 55, in a specialized field, was a financial death sentence. The 6-week severance was an insult. It wouldn't even cover one semester of Emily's tuition. That house, the first one I surveyed for Sterling, was my home. My life was built on the foundation of that company, and Brent Jr. was trying to bulldoze it for being inefficient. After security watched me pack my personal photos and my old, worn-out copy of the Surveyor's Handbook, I drove home. I didn't get angry. I didn't despair. I walked down to my basement office, the one I'd built myself. I unlocked the first of 4 steel filing cabinets, the truth file. I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of focused, methodical calm. It felt like preparing for a major military operation. I pulled every file. 14 properties in total had significant documented discrepancies between the official record and the ground truth. There was the Riverwalk Shopping Center, whose rear loading docks and entire eastern parking lot were built on land belonging to the city's Parks Department. There was the Northgate Industrial Park, where a warehouse extension crossed onto property owned by the railroad. And there were 12 other residential and commercial properties with encroachments ranging from a few feet to an entire building wing. Brent Jr. made it easy for me. His arrogance was my greatest ally. While I was compiling my documents, he was all over social media. A post on LinkedIn announced my, quote, 26, and thanked me for my years of service, alongside a photo of him with his new 28-year-old, quote. He did an interview with the local business journal about his aggressive vision for Sterling development, mentioning the Evergreen Point project as the flagship of a new era. He was celebrating his victory so loudly he couldn't hear the fuse I was lighting. He never bothered to check the company's own deep archives. He never asked why certain parcels had notes in his father's handwriting saying, "See Clay" before any refi. He assumed the digital files were the absolute truth, and I was just an old man who didn't understand progress. His biggest error was in deleting the final email I sent from my personal account the day after I was fired. It was a single sentence. I sent it with a read receipt, which he opened at 10:04 a.m. He never replied. He thought it was a threat. It wasn't. It was a courtesy. My evidence compilation was exacting. For each of the 14 properties, I prepared a complete package. It contained my original field notes, some dating back to the late 1990s. It had a newly drafted, certified plat map, stamped with my professional surveyor's seal. It included a detailed affidavit, notarized by my neighbor who was a public notary, explaining the nature of the discrepancy and referencing the specific state statutes that required me to correct it. State Board of Professional Land Surveyors, Administrative Code, Section 341.7, Duty to Report. It was ironclad. I wasn't an angry ex-employee. I was a licensed professional, fulfilling his legal and ethical duty. Firing me had simply removed any corporate obligation to report it internally first. My absence at the company was already causing ripples. I got a call from a frantic project manager at a different site. A subcontractor had hit a major fiber optic cable. He was yelling, "It wasn't on any of the plans, Clay." I knew exactly where that cable was. It had been laid 20 years ago, and the utility company's, quote, 31 drawing was off by 15 feet. I knew because I was there when they laid it. I had a note about it in my personal logbook. But I wasn't an employee anymore. "Sorry, Bill," I said calmly. "You'll have to talk to the director of geospatial strategy." Work on that site stopped for 3 days. It cost the company over $200,000. It was a small taste of the chaos to come. On a quiet Monday morning, 3 weeks after I was fired, I loaded a single banker's box into the passenger seat of my 1999 Ford F-150. The truck was almost as old as my career with Sterling. It had dents and scratches, but it ran perfectly. I drove to the county administration building downtown. I walked up to the counter at the Recorder of Deeds office. A young clerk looked at the heavy box. I said, placing the box on the counter. She looked skeptical, but she opened the first file. She saw my professional seal, the notarized affidavit, the clear documentation. Her demeanor changed. This wasn't some crank. This was official business. She spent the next hour processing the paperwork. The filing fees came to $1,540. I paid with a personal check. She gave me a stamped receipt for each filing. I walked out into the sunshine. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a threat. I had simply done my job. And with that quiet act, The system began to work. The wheels of bureaucracy and law began to turn. The emergency didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrived as a series of quiet, digital notifications. At the headquarters of Global Title Insurance, a compliance officer's computer flagged a material change to recorded plat for policy number GT774B, the one covering the Riverwalk Shopping Center. An automated email was sent to their legal department. At the regional office of First National Bank, the Commercial Loan Division received a similar alert regarding the Northgate Industrial Park, which secured a $28 million loan. Their risk management department was notified. At a law firm across town, a paralegal monitoring county filings for the Miller family saw the name Sterling Development next to a corrected survey filing for the property adjacent to their farm. He downloaded the document and saw, with dawning realization, that the foundation of the new condominium tower was 5 feet over their property line. He immediately walked it into a senior partner's office. The phone calls started. Low-level lawyers calling low-level managers. They escalated. Senior VPs calling senior VPs. The message was the same. Quote, 39, quote. The full-blown crisis hit a week later. It took the form of an emergency board meeting for Sterling Development, called not by Brent, but by the company's primary lender. The setting was the main boardroom, a place of polished mahogany and hushed power. I wasn't there, not at first. I was sitting in a small anteroom down the hall, sipping a cup of coffee. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Helen, sat next to me, reviewing her notes. Through the slightly ajar door, we could hear Brent's voice, strained but still arrogant. He was at the peak of his perceived power, trying to manage a crisis he didn't comprehend. Quote 40, he was saying, his voice echoing slightly. Quote 41, a voice, older and calmer, cut him off. It was Arthur Vance, the bank's chief counsel. Mr. Sterling, this is not a hiccup. 14 of your flagship properties, with a combined insured value of over $400 million, have clouded titles. As of this morning, we have received 12 stop work orders and 2 formal notices of trespass from adjacent landowners. Your title insurance on these properties has been suspended pending review. Your line of credit is frozen, effective immediately. Silence. The thick, heavy kind. Then Brent's voice, sputtering. Vance asked, his tone icy. Helen looked at me and gave a slight nod. We stood up. She opened the door, and we walked in. Every eye in the room swiveled to me. The board members, men I'd known for decades, looked pale and shaken. Brent Sterling Junior stood at the head of the table, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His Wharton-trained mind couldn't process it. The man he'd dismissed as a relic was now the most powerful person in the room. The power shift was palpable, a physical change in the atmosphere. Clayton, one of the older board members, a friend of Brent's father, said quietly. Before I could answer, Brent pointed a trembling finger at me. I looked at him. My voice was low and steady, carrying easily across the silent room. I paused, letting it sink in. Vance, the bank's lawyer, took over. He laid out the catastrophic legal and financial exposure. The cost to cure the defects would be astronomical. Buying the encroached upon land, if the owners were even willing to sell, would cost tens of millions. Demolishing and rebuilding the non-compliant structures was even more expensive. The company was, for all intents and purposes, insolvent. Brent slumped into his chair, defeated. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a dawning, hollow-eyed horror. The board officially voted to suspend Brent Sterling Jr. as CEO, pending a full investigation, citing gross negligence. The vote was unanimous. They then turned to me. Helen stepped forward and laid a single folder on the table. Mr. Rhodes is prepared to help you navigate this crisis, she said. He is the only person with the historical knowledge to even begin to untangle it. He is willing to do so on a consulting basis. My terms were simple and non-negotiable. A consulting fee of $2.5 million, with half paid up front. An hourly rate of $800 for all work performed. The immediate and full funding of my original defined benefit pension, backdated to my termination. And finally, the deed, free and clear, to a 50-acre undeveloped parcel in the hill country the company had been holding for years. A beautiful piece of land I had surveyed a decade ago and had always loved. They agreed without a single counteroffer. They had no choice. The aftermath was a controlled demolition. Brent Jr. was fired for cause, escorted from the building by the same security guards who had walked me out a month earlier. He left behind his Montblanc pen and a half-finished espresso. He lost everything. His father's partners on the board sued him personally to recoup some of the losses. The last I heard, he was managing a BMW dealership in Scottsdale, his story a cautionary tale whispered at the country club. Sterling Development, crippled by lawsuits and debt, was sold for parts to a national competitor a year later. The name was scrubbed from the buildings. The brand Brent was so proud of ceased to exist. The board members who had enabled his recklessness lost their entire investment. The poetic justice was everywhere. The Evergreen Point project was a total loss. The Miller family refused to sell the land the foundation was on. For 2 years, the concrete skeleton of Tower A stood as a monument to Brent's hubris before it was finally demolished at a cost of $3 million. The Riverwalk Shopping Center had to tear down its entire eastern wing and loading docks, a public humiliation that made the evening news. I spent the next 18 months working as a consultant, cleaning up the mess. I met with landowners, poring over old deeds and my own notes, negotiating boundary line adjustments, and creating new, accurate surveys. I worked with the new owners, showing them the reality of the assets they had acquired. I did the work. I was paid handsomely for it. My daughter Emily finished her undergraduate degree and is now in law school. Her tuition is paid in full. I used the rest of my consulting fee to build a small, sturdy house on that 50-acre parcel in the hill country. It's quiet here. I have a workshop where I restore old transits and theodolites, the beautiful brass and steel instruments of my trade. Sometimes I sit on my porch and look out over the land. My 1999 F-150 is parked in the driveway. It's got over 300,000 miles on it now, but it still runs true. Like me, it's old infrastructure. Reliable. Built to last. Brent Jr. was wrong about agility. Speed is worthless without direction. Progress is meaningless without a solid foundation. He thought the value was in the spreadsheets, in the brand, in the, quote, big picture. He never understood that the real value, the only thing that's truly real, is the ground beneath your feet. The land doesn't care about buzzwords. It doesn't lie. And eventually, no matter how long it takes, the truth always gets recorded.